Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome to a brand new gardening season in our garden here in Spokane, Washington, where the hardiness zone ranges from 5B to 6A. I am so excited to be out in the garden again, and today I want to talk to you about vegetable plant supports that work great. So what's the big deal about plant supports anyway? Well, there's some very good reasons to use them on certain types of crops in your garden. First of all, the plants will grow better if they're given the right kind of support. Second of all, if you can keep the foliage of the plants off of the ground, there's less chance that they could be infected by any types of pathogens that might exist in the soil. It's certainly easier to harvest your crops when they're up on supports. And if you live in a windy area, there are some crops that really benefit from some extra protection so they don't get knocked over and potentially damaged. Which types of plants benefit from supports? Tomatoes, pole beans, peppers, eggplant, winter squash, cucumbers, pumpkins, peas, and corn. Today I'm going to show you the types of plant supports we use in our garden because we always get questions about them. I thought I'd start with our bean arbor because this is what I get asked the most questions about. So way back in 2008, I was trying to come up with a better support system for the pole beans that we love to grow every year. I went to a Kroger's garden center. It was at the very beginning of the growing season, and they had all of their support systems on sale for 50% off. I could not believe my luck. So what I did is I bought 4 individual trellises. They were $25 each instead of $50. I was feeling pretty good about that. Now, pole beans need at least 6 feet of height for growing on. And these obviously are a little more than that. But what I've done is we have our raised beds, which are 3 feet apart. And these, if I remember correctly, were like 44 inches apart. So I put them in a few inches into each of the raised beds, and then I spaced them a few inches apart so they would run the entire length of our 8-foot-long raised beds. The beans grow great on this. And the thing that I love the very most is that in the heat of the summer, when I need to pick beans, this is all covered with the vines, so I get to stand in the shade while I'm harvesting the beans. How cool is that? So this is the cattle panel arbor, as I like to call it. It's the other arbor in our garden that provides quite a lot of support for vining vegetables. It's made from 2 cattle panels, which are typically about 4 feet by 16 feet long. They are extremely sturdy, galvanized metal, and when we formed them into these 2 arches, we use sticks of rebar on the outsides of each, because when you try to make this into an arch, there's a lot of outward pressure, and so we needed to make sure it wouldn't go kablooey. So we prevented that from happening with the sticks of rebar. But this is something that I like to use for growing winter squash, cucumbers, small pumpkins, maybe up to about this size, and the vining type of a zucchini squash that's known as tromboncino. And this works so well because it's galvanized. It should last for probably forever for us. And I should also mention that we're good about rotating our crops in our garden every year to keep the plants healthy and productive. And so this is something, along with the bean arbor and other types of supports, that we move around to the different beds within the garden. Now you might be wondering why we would want to grow or need to grow things like pumpkins and winter squash up on a support when they grow just fine on the ground. Well, there's a practical reason for it, which is we won't have the vines growing all through the pathways getting in the way. It's also easier to see how the plants are growing, especially how the squash or pumpkins or cucumbers, etc., are developing when you have them growing up like this. And yes, it does look really cool, so that's a factor too. Now, do you want to see how we support our tomato plants? I'm standing behind this so you can see it better. This is a panel of concrete reinforcing mesh, and you can buy it at building supply centers. It's not terribly expensive, and it lasts for years. So the dimensions of it are 42 inches by 84, and we have supported each end of it with some heavy-duty metal fence posts that are pounded down into the ground, and this is tied to it. So what I do is I grow my tomato plants on either side in kind of a zigzag pattern to give them some spacing. They grow beautifully up this, and even though this stops at this height, the plants can still grow and support themselves for those last few feet. So that has worked out really well for us, and it's very easy to harvest them or to prune branches as needed and so on. Now, while I'm on the subject of growing tomato plants, you always want to support them so that they grow upright, especially for the reason I mentioned early on about not wanting the plant's foliage to be in contact with the soil, because if there is some type of a pathogen that the tomatoes are susceptible to in the soil, that is an easy way for it to transfer to the plant. So always use this support. Now, in the early days, we had some extra field fence from fencing around our property, and we decided to use it to create nice, sturdy tomato cages. So if you see something like this in a small roll at a building supply center, that would be a possibility. There are different types of tomato cages that you'll typically see in garden centers. Do not buy the little ones, because what will happen is that as soon as the plants really get growing, they become top heavy and they're going to topple over, potentially knocking developing tomatoes off of the plants, damaging the plant, maybe even breaking it off at the base. That's not good. So that's one thing I want you to avoid. Make sure you get a nice, tall, sturdy tomato cage. The other thing, no matter what kind of cage you use, is to always, I can never emphasize this enough, put some type of a sturdy stake inside the tomato cage, hammer it down, which I would demonstrate, but the soil's still frozen. Hammer it down and then tie the cage to the stake so that if you have a strong windstorm or something like that, this cage is not going to topple over, damage your plant, and so on. So keep that in mind. Always provide extra support inside your tomato cage. Now, one more thought about growing tomatoes. If you happen to be growing them in containers, they still need some type of upright support. So you might be able to find a tomato cage that will fit well for it. This is actually a black plastic plant support, and it's slightly larger than the diameter of this pot, but we just stabilize it with a little stake inside, and it provides a nice sturdy support for the tomato plant growing in the pot. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned about possibly needing to support your corn plants. If you live in a windy area, I strongly encourage you to give them a little support, and I'm going to show you the type of system that I use. There is nothing more depressing than coming out to your garden thinking everything's lovely, you've had a windstorm, and you look at your corn patch, which yesterday was standing nice and tall and doing great, and today it's all snapped off at the base. And of course, the plants are totally done when that happens. That is so depressing. It has happened to us quite a few years ago, and I learned that just to be on the safe side, give them a little support. So I want to explain what I use. It's very simple, and I can reuse it year after year after year. Now let's pretend you've planted a few rows of corn in this raised bed. And you're possibly noticing that on the outside of the raised bed, and it's on both sides, there are some white upright pipes. We put those on the outsides of all of our raised beds because since we're good about rotating our crops every year, meaning moving them to different beds each year, we wanted to make sure that if we needed to put some hoops and cover over a bed of, say, broccoli or whatever, that the upright supports for putting those hoops into were always there, ready to go. So I take advantage of the fact that those are out there for growing my corn. We have a whole bunch of these sticks of galvanized metal conduit. And so what I do for the corn bed is I will put the pipes at different intervals around the perimeter of the bed. So I've got the 6 pipes in place, and what I do is I let the corn plants grow up a little bit, and then I will wrap jute twine around the perimeter of this bed using these pipes. Then when the plants are about this tall, I run one more line of jute around the perimeter, and then when they're about this tall, I run the final row of jute twine around it. So the concept is that if you have a strong windstorm, because there's that support there, the plants will just move a little bit, but they won't move so far that they snap off at the base. And this has saved our plants every single year. Now, you don't have to have the upright pipes on the outside like this. You could just hammer this down into the soil. So there's different ways to do this, but it's a simple way to save your corn crop. And last but not least, how does free plant support sound? We recently pruned our apple trees, and as we were doing that, I was saving the strongest and straightest branches I could find to use for plant supports. This is just a fraction of what I saved. And so we like to use these apple branches to support things like pepper plants, eggplants, and especially our pea planting. And I wanted to show you a photo of that. And just a little side note about growing peas without supports. I don't care if the seed packet says they will not require support. Trust me, they will. I was fooled by that once, maybe even twice. And what happens is they grow to a certain point and then they all fall together in a heap. Oh, what a nightmare to try to harvest pods from that. So definitely give them supports. And these branches work so well for doing that, and they look cool in the garden too. So consider doing that. And even if you don't have apple trees, there are a lot of different types of trees and shrubs that do have quite strong and straight branches that you might need to prune off. Or maybe a neighbor has some and they'd be happy to share them with you. Okay, so that's everything you need to know about how we use plant supports in our garden and why you should too. They're going to keep your plants healthy, they'll be easier to harvest from, and the plants will grow really well. If you have any topics for future videos, please let me know in the comments area of this video on my YouTube channel, and I will do my best to help you out. I want this information to be really useful for you. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.